There's a wand in the wizarding world so powerful, so coveted, that its very existence has sparked centuries of betrayal, bloodshed, and dark ambition. This isn't just any wand, it's the Elder Wand, a relic of unimaginable power, forged in secrecy by a man who believed he could cheat death itself. Its story begins with Antioch Peverell, a wizard whose name echoes through history, not for his wisdom, but for his fatal mistake, the belief that power could ever be wielded without consequence. And oh, how that belief would cost him, and so many others, dearly. Wherever you're joining us from tonight, whether it's late under a blanket of stars or early with the first light of dawn, we'd love to know, what time is it for you? Drop a comment below and let us share this journey into the shadows of the Elder Wand's past. Because this isn't just a tale of magic, it's a story about the darkest corners of human desire. From the moment Antioch first held that wand, boasting of his invincibility, he set in motion a cycle of violence that would span generations. The wand didn't just choose its masters, it destroyed them. And yet, despite the blood spilled in its name, the allure of its power never faded. So why does this wand, above all others, hold such a grip on the wizarding world? What makes its legacy so tangled with tragedy? Over the centuries, the Elder Wand has passed from hand to hand, not through loyalty or skill, but through stealth, murder, and deceit. Each new master believed they could tame it, only to learn too late that the wand's true power lies in its ruthlessness. It doesn't serve, it consumes. And as we trace its path through history, from Antioch's fatal pride to the battles fought in its name, one thing becomes clear. The Elder Wand doesn't just change hands. It changes souls. So settle in, because this is a story where power comes at a price, and the price is always, always blood. Antioch Peverell never saw the blade coming. The first master of the Elder Wand died as so many after him would, in the dark, unprepared, betrayed by his own arrogance. He had boasted openly of his unbeatable wand, flaunting its power like a king on a throne, never considering that thrones are built to be toppled. The night he was murdered in his sleep, the wand didn't protect him. It didn't even stir, because the Elder Wand doesn't care for loyalty. It craves strength, and Antioch's greatest weakness was believing he no longer needed to be strong. The thief who slit his throat and stole the wand vanished into history, unnamed, but their crime set the pattern for centuries to come. This wasn't just theft, it was a declaration. The wand could be taken, it would be taken, and from that moment, its legend grew like a shadow, stretching across borders and generations. Wizards who'd never held it still whispered its name in taverns and alleyways, spinning tales of duels won with a single flick, of spells so potent they bent reality itself. But here's the truth they missed. The wand's real magic wasn't in its power. It was in the hunger it created. Think about it. How many lives were shattered chasing this thing? How many wizards, perfectly content before they heard the whispers, suddenly couldn't sleep without imagining that power in their hands? The Elder Wand didn't just change owners, it warped minds. It turned brother against brother, friend against friend, all under the same deadly illusion that this time the wand's curse wouldn't apply to them, that they would be the exception. But here's the cruel twist. The wand's curse wasn't some spell woven into its wood. It was human nature itself, greed. Paranoia, the unbearable weight of looking over your shoulder, wondering if tonight's drink would be your last. Because once you possess the Elder Wand, you don't own it. You're just borrowing it until the next knife finds your back. And that, more than any enchantment, is why its path is paved with graves. Centuries blurred together in the wake of Antioch's murder, the Elder Wand slipping through history like a ghost. Its owners were as varied as they were doomed, a cunning duelist who won it in a midnight fight behind a Parisian tavern, only to be poisoned by her own apprentice. A warlock who used its power to carve out a kingdom in the Balkans until his throne room became his tomb. Even the brilliant Egbert the Egregious, who outwitted 3 assassins before the 4th caught him mid-spell. The wand's path wasn't just written in blood, it was a lesson in irony. Every master who thought they'd broken the cycle became the next link in its chain. Then came a twist no one expected. A historian, not a warrior, not a dark wizard, but a young scholar named Ceridwen, with ink-stained fingers and a dangerous curiosity. She'd grown up on whispers of the wand, how it toppled empires, how it promised victory, but delivered only ruin. Unlike those who sought to wield it, Ceridwen sought only to understand it. She traveled to crumbling libraries, deciphered cursed scrolls, even tracked down the descendants of its victims. Her journals filled with names, dates, and a chilling pattern. The wand didn't just kill its masters. It drew them, as if the very act of seeking its history made you part of it. Ceridwen should have stopped there, but the deeper she dug, the more the wand's shadow seemed to follow her. Letters went unanswered. Neighbors avoided her door. Then one night, she woke to find her research scattered across the floor, not by wind, not by chance, but by hands she couldn't see. The wand's curse wasn't just violence, it was silence. Those who came too close to its truth vanished into it, and Ceridwen, with her meticulous notes and relentless questions, had gotten closer than anyone. Here's the cruelest part. She never even held the wand. She didn't want its power, but the Elder Wand didn't care about intentions. It thrived on fear, on obsession, on the way its legend warped the minds of those who chased it, even those who only chased its story. Ceridwen's final entry was a single line, scratched in haste. "It knows I'm looking." After that, the trail went cold. Her work survived, but she didn't. Because the wand's greatest trick wasn't making people believe they could master it. It was making them believe they could outsmart it. The darkest chapter in the Elder Wand's history began not with a whisper, but with a storm, a young man with golden hair, and a vision of a new world order. Gellert Grindelwald didn't just want the wand, he understood it. While others had been blinded by its power, he saw the Elder Wand for what it truly was, a symbol. A weapon to reshape the wizarding world in his image, and when it finally fell into his hands, it wasn't through some midnight duel or back alley betrayal. No, Grindelwald won it with words. He tracked down Gregorovich, the wand maker who'd spent years trying to replicate its magic, and instead of striking him down, he convinced him. Whispered promises of a future where wizards no longer hid in shadows, where their power would be celebrated, not feared. It was all a lie, of course. Grindelwald didn't want freedom, he wanted dominion, and the moment Gregorovich handed over the wand, his usefulness ended. The wand's curse had found its perfect match, a master who embraced destruction as destiny. With the Elder Wand in his grasp, Grindelwald's reign of terror began. Prisons emptied, cities burned. He didn't just duel his enemies. He made spectacles of them, turning defeats into demonstrations of his invincibility. The wand's power amplified his own, yes, but something darker happened too. It fed his delusions. The more he won, the more he believed the wand had chosen him, that he was somehow different from all those who'd come before. And then there were the visions. Grindelwald claimed the wand, showed him things, glimpses of a future where he stood triumphant. But was it prophecy, or just the madness of a man who'd stared into the wand's abyss too long? His obsession with the Deathly Hallows twisted into something grotesque. He wasn't just seeking immortality anymore. He wanted to rewrite the rules of life and death themselves. The wand's myth grew with every atrocity, but here's the cruel irony. Grindelwald's downfall came not from an enemy's spell, but from his own arrogance. He never saw Albus Dumbledore as a true threat, not even when they stood face to face in that fateful duel, because after a lifetime of the wand's whispers, he'd forgotten the oldest lesson of all. No one masters the Elder Wand. It masters you, and when Dumbledore disarmed him that day, it wasn't just a defeat. It was the wand's final betrayal. Grindelwald's reign ended in a cell, screaming at shadows. But the wand, it simply moved on, because legends don't mourn their villains. They just wait for the next one. Albus Dumbledore stood over Grindelwald's fallen form, the Elder Wand clutched in his hand, still humming with the echoes of their duel. It should have been a moment of triumph, the dark wizard defeated, the wand's terrible power finally restrained by wisdom rather than ambition. But Dumbledore knew better. The wand's weight in his palm wasn't a prize, it was a test. Unlike every master before him, Dumbledore didn't revel in the wand's strength. He didn't parade it through the halls of Hogwarts, or wield it to reshape the world. Instead, he did something far more radical. He ignored it. Oh, he used it, yes, but never for domination, never for glory. In his hands, the Elder Wand became a tool like any other, its power carefully measured, its legend deliberately downplayed. He repaired broken staircases with it. He lit candles. He even, on one particularly tedious evening, used it to untangle a knotted skein of yarn while grading third-year essays. But here's the tragedy. Dumbledore's wisdom didn't make him immune to the wand's curse. It just changed the way the curse unfolded, because while others had been destroyed by their hunger for power, Dumbledore's downfall came from the opposite flaw, his faith in people. He trusted too deeply, forgave too easily, and that trust would cost him everything. Take Draco Malfoy, a boy who'd spent years sneering at Dumbledore's ideals, raised on whispers of pureblood supremacy, armed with a mission to kill. And yet, when Draco stood trembling on the astronomy tower, wand shaking in his hand, Dumbledore didn't resist. He didn't raise the Elder Wand in defense. He offered Draco a way out not because he was naive, but because he believed, right until the end, that even the darkest hearts could turn. And in that moment, the wand's curse struck. Not through violence, not through betrayal, but through the very thing Dumbledore had always championed, second chances. Because Draco didn't kill him, but the chaos he unleashed led to Dumbledore's death all the same. The wand hadn't been won in some grand duel. It had slipped away in the confusion, its allegiance shifting without fanfare. Dumbledore had spent a lifetime outsmarting dark wizards, only to be undone by a scared boy and his own unwavering hope. The irony would have made him smile, because in the end, the Elder Wand didn't care about intentions. It didn't reward goodness or punish evil. It only obeyed one law: power, taken by any means necessary. And Dumbledore, for all his brilliance, had forgotten the oldest rule of all: no one breaks the wand's cycle. They just become part of it. Voldemort's obsession with the Elder Wand wasn't just about power. It was about fear. The Dark Lord, who had splintered his soul into pieces to escape death, still trembled at the thought of being outmatched. And when whispers reached him that Dumbledore had once wielded the wand, that it might now lie hidden somewhere, waiting for a new master, his paranoia ignited. Here was a relic that could undo all his careful plans, a weapon that might rival even his own stolen immortality. So he did what tyrants always do: he hunted. But Voldemort's mistake was in thinking the wand would obey him like any other. He didn't understand its history, its cruel sense of irony. To him, it was just a tool, another Horcrux, another guarantee of his reign. He never paused to consider why Dumbledore, the only wizard he'd ever feared, had kept it locked away, or why the wand's trail seemed to vanish into thin air after Dumbledore's death. Because here's the truth Voldemort missed: the Elder Wand doesn't answer to brute force. It answers to fate. His desperation led him to Gregorovich's workshop, to Grindelwald's prison cell, even to Dumbledore's tomb, where he shattered the white marble in a rage, stealing the wand from its resting place. And in that moment, he believed he'd won, but the wand lay lifeless in his hand, its power flickering like a dying flame, because Voldemort hadn't won it. He'd stolen it from a dead man, and the Elder Wand has no loyalty to grave robbers. Meanwhile, Harry Potter was piecing together a truth Voldemort couldn't grasp. The wand's allegiance hadn't passed to Snape, who'd cast the killing curse on Dumbledore. It had passed to Draco, who disarmed Dumbledore moments before, and when Draco's wand was taken by Harry in the chaos of Malfoy Manor, the wand's loyalty shifted again, not through murder, not through some grand duel, but through a desperate scuffle in a darkened hallway. That's the wand's greatest jest. It mocks the pomp and ceremony of power. It doesn't care about titles or prophecies. It cares only for the moment when strength is tested, and in that moment, Harry, without even knowing it, had become its true master. So when Harry and Voldemort faced each other in the ruins of Hogwarts, the Elder Wand's final betrayal unfolded. Voldemort raised it high, screaming curses that should have shattered the heavens, but the wand refused him. It turned its own killing curse back upon its would-be master, not out of love for Harry, not out of some moral reckoning, but because it obeys one law above all, the law of conquest. And Harry, who'd never sought the wand, never even wanted it, had conquered its last master in the only way that mattered. The Dark Lord's reign ended as so many before him had, with the wand's laughter ringing in his ears. Because the Elder Wand doesn't grant immortality, it reveals folly, and in the end, Voldemort was just another name on its long, bloody list. Gregorovich should have known better. A wand maker of his skill, with centuries of family knowledge etched into his fingertips, understood the danger of powerful artifacts better than most. And yet, the moment he acquired the Elder Wand, all that caution evaporated like morning mist. He didn't just study it, he boasted, spread rumors through the wizarding underworld that he'd unlocked its secrets, that he could replicate its power. It was an open invitation to disaster. His workshop in Eastern Europe, became a pilgrimage site for the desperate and the power-hungry. Wizards traveled for miles, offering gold, favors, even their own wands for a glimpse of the legendary relic. Gregorovich, giddy with pride, would hold it up like a trophy, spinning tales of its might without ever realizing the truth. The wand wasn't just an object to be examined. It was a predator, and he was the bait. Then came the night his arrogance met its match. A young man with mismatched eyes and a smile like a knife blade slipped into his workshop. Grindelwald didn't bother with stealth. He wanted Gregorovich to see him coming, to understand too late what he'd unleashed. The wand maker reached for his shelves, for his defenses, but they crumbled like paper. Because here's the cruel joke of the Elder Wand. It doesn't protect those who merely possess it. It abandons them. The theft itself was almost casual. A flick of Grindelwald's wrist, a whispered spell, and the wand leapt from Gregorovich's grip, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. No grand duel. No heroic last stand. Just a broken old man clutching splintered wood where the most powerful wand in history had rested seconds before. But the real tragedy wasn't the loss, it was what came after. Gregorovich spent years hunting rumors, chasing shadows, convinced he could reclaim what was rightfully his. He became a cautionary tale, a man so consumed by regret that he forgot how to make anything but hollow replicas of the wand that ruined him. His once brilliant craft withered. His name, once respected, became synonymous with folly. That's the wand's true curse. It doesn't just take itself from you, it takes everything else too. Your pride, your purpose, the very things that made you worthy of holding it in the first place. Gregorovich died as he lived those final years, hunched over a workbench, surrounded by failed imitations, still whispering to empty air about how close he'd been to greatness. The lesson: you don't study the Elder Wand, you survive it, and Gregorovich, for all his knowledge, never learned that until it was far too late. Harry never saw it coming, the twist buried in the chaos of that terrible night on the astronomy tower. While the wizarding world mourned Dumbledore and Voldemort hunted for the wand's next master, the truth had already slipped into place, quiet as a shadow. Because power doesn't always change hands with a bang. Sometimes, it's just a disarming spell cast by a terrified boy. Draco Malfoy hadn't meant to make history when he raised his wand against Dumbledore. He wasn't thinking about allegiances or magical theory. He was shaking, desperate, trapped between his family's loyalty and the horror of what Voldemort had asked him to do. But magic doesn't care about intentions. The moment Draco's spell struck Dumbledore's wrist, forcing the Elder Wand from his grip, the wand's loyalty shifted. Not to Snape, who delivered the killing blow out of mercy, not to Voldemort, who would later rip it from Dumbledore's tomb, to Draco, a boy who didn't even know he'd won the most dangerous weapon in the world. And here's where the wand's cruel humor shines brightest. The most pivotal moment in its bloody history wasn't some grand duel between legends. It was a fluke. An accident. A scared kid making a choice he'd regret for the rest of his life. Because while Draco walked away from the tower that night believing he'd failed, the wand had already marked him. It didn't matter that he never held it, never even knew it existed. Magic has its own rules, and the Elder Wand obeys only one conquest, by any means. This was the truth Harry pieced together months later, surrounded by the ruins of Malfoy Manor, his fingers brushing the broken pieces of a twin wand. The realization hit him like a curse. When he'd wrestled Draco's wand from him in that darkened hallway, he hadn't just been fighting for his life. He'd been continuing a story centuries old. Because the wand's allegiance doesn't care about fairness. It doesn't ask if you meant to win. It only knows who walked away with the power, and Voldemort. The Dark Lord, with all his obsession over prophecy and blood purity, never once considered that his fate might hinge on something as small as a teenage brawl. He hunted Snape, murdered Grindelwald, even desecrated Dumbledore's grave, all while the wand's true master was the boy he dismissed as insignificant. That's the irony that doomed him. You can split your soul into pieces, cheat death a dozen times over, but arrogance, that's the one flaw magic can't fix. So when Harry faced Voldemort in the Great Hall, the Elder Wand wasn't just refusing its master. It was laughing, because after centuries of bloodshed, after all the grand schemes and epic battles, its final joke was this. The most powerful wand in history chose its victor not in some clash of titans, but in a moment so small, so human, that Voldemort never saw it coming. And that's the real magic, not the spells we cast, but the choices we make when no one's watching. Harry stood in the wreckage of the Great Hall, the Elder Wand resting in his palm light as a feather, heavy as a lifetime. For centuries, this wand had been a prize, a weapon, a curse disguised as power, but Harry saw it for what it truly was, a mirror. Every wizard who'd ever held it saw their reflection in its wood. Some saw invincibility, others saw destiny. Harry, he saw a choice. The realization didn't come in a flash of light or a whisper from the beyond. It came from the quietest corner of his mind, the one that remembered Dumbledore's tired eyes when he spoke of the wand's history. It's time to stop the bleeding, that voice seemed to say, because here's the truth no one had dared to speak. The Elder Wand's power wasn't in its magic. It was in the stories people told themselves about it. The moment you believed you deserved it, you were already doomed. So Harry made a decision that would have baffled Antioch Peverell, horrified Grindelwald, and left Voldemort speechless. He walked away. Not out of fear, not out of weakness, but out of something far more radical understanding. He returned to the ruins of Dumbledore's tomb, not to hide the wand like a shameful secret, but to lay its legend to rest. As his fingers brushed the white marble, repairing what Voldemort had shattered, something extraordinary happened. The wand's hum of power faded, not with a bang, but a sigh. Like it had been waiting all these centuries for someone to finally say, enough. This wasn't just an ending, it was an unraveling. By refusing to wield the wand, by refusing to continue its story, Harry did what no spell could ever accomplish. He broke the cycle. Not with force, but with absence. The wand's curse had always thrived on desire, on the unshakable belief that power was something to be taken. Harry's greatest act was proving it could also be something to release. And so the Elder Wand's last master became the first to walk away unscathed. Not because he was the most powerful, not because he was destined, but because he was the only one who looked at the most feared object in the wizarding world and asked the simplest, most dangerous question: what if we just stopped? The air in the Great Hall crackled with spent magic, the scent of burning wood and ozone thick enough to taste. Voldemort's scream still echoed off the shattered walls as the impossible unfolded. His killing curse, cast with the Elder Wand's full might, twisting midair like a snake, striking its own tail. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the curse rebounded, not with a roar, but with the quiet inevitability of a door clicking shut. This wasn't just defeat. It was poetry. The Dark Lord, who'd spent a lifetime fearing death, was felled by the very power he'd stolen to escape it. The wand hadn't betrayed him. It had simply never been his to begin with. Because the Elder Wand's allegiance doesn't care about prophecies or blood purity. It answers to one brutal truth. Power flows to those who take it, and Harry had taken it without even knowing. That scuffle in Malfoy Manor, that desperate grab for Draco's wand, it was enough. The wand didn't need a grand gesture. It only needed a moment of real conquest, however small. And here's the cruelest joke of all. Voldemort died as every previous master had, unprepared, uncomprehending, his red eyes wide with shock as he realized, too late, that the wand in his hand had been laughing at him the whole time. The Elder Wand doesn't crown kings. It exposes fools. But this moment wasn't just about Voldemort's end. It was about the wand's oldest lesson, written in curses and blood across centuries. Power sought for its own sake always turns inward. Grindelwald learned it in a cell. Dumbledore learned it on a tower. And now, as Voldemort's body hit the floor with a thud quieter than anyone expected, the lesson was complete. The wand's cycle had always been a Ouroboros, a serpent devouring itself. Yet something was different this time. The wand didn't pulse with triumph in Harry's grip. It lay still, its magic settling like dust after a storm, because Harry hadn't won it through ambition. He'd stumbled into its loyalty by accident, by a choice made not for power, but for survival. And that was the twist the wand's history had never seen before. A master who didn't want to be master at all. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the sound of a story ending, not with a bang, not with a prophecy fulfilled, but with a truth so simple it had taken centuries to reveal. The wand's greatest weakness wasn't a spell or a rival. It was indifference. The moment someone finally refused to play its game, the cycle shattered, and as Harry looked down at the wand in his hand, he realized he wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a relic, a thing whose time had passed. The Battle of Hogwarts ended many things that day, but for the Elder Wand, it ended the only way it ever could, not with a victor, but with a choice. And for the first time in its long, bloody history, the choice was to walk away. Harry's fingers traced the Elder Wand's smooth surface, one last time, feeling the weight of centuries in his grip. This wasn't just a wand, it was a chain, linking everyone who'd ever held it to the same brutal story of ambition and blood. And yet, as he stood there in the quiet aftermath of battle, he realized something extraordinary. The chain could end. Not with a grand duel or a dramatic sacrifice, but with a simple refusal. He could have kept it, could have justified it a dozen ways, as a tool for rebuilding, as protection against future threats, even as a trophy for the war he'd won. But Harry had learned the wand's true lesson. Power isn't defined by what you wield, but by what you walk away from. Every master before him had believed they were the exception, that their hands alone could steer its destiny. And every one of them had been wrong, so he made his way back to Dumbledore's tomb, The wands would cool against his palm. The white marble, once shattered by Voldemort's rage, now stood repaired, not with magic, but with care. As Harry placed the wand inside, he didn't feel like he was hiding a weapon. He was burying a ghost. The wand would lie here, not as a secret to tempt future generations, but as a relic of a cycle that had finally run its course. This wasn't just about breaking the wand's physical path. It was about dismantling the myth that had fueled it. For centuries, the wizarding world had whispered of the Elder Wand's invincibility, spinning its legend into something inevitable, unstoppable. But legends only live when we believe them. By returning it untouched, Harry did something more radical than destroying it. He rendered it irrelevant. Think about that for a moment. The most feared object in magical history, reduced to stillness not by force, but by choice. No fanfare, no last spell. Just a boy who looked at the pinnacle of power and said, "No more." And perhaps that's the most astonishing twist in the wand's long, dark tale. Its final master didn't fall to betrayal or violence. He didn't cling to it until death pried it from his fingers. He let go, voluntarily, completely, because Harry understood what so many others had missed. The wand's true power wasn't in its magic. It was in the stories people told about it. And stories, unlike wands, can be rewritten. So the Elder Wand rests now where it belongs, not in the hand of a conqueror, but in the quiet of a grave. Its legacy isn't one of unbroken dominance, but of a cycle finally, mercifully, broken. Not by a spell, but by something far more potent, the willingness to walk away. The scholar's hands trembled as she turned the final page of a reconstructed manuscript, the ink still fresh from years of painstaking research. Decades had passed since her first encounter with the Elder Wand's dark legacy. Since the night she'd scrawled, "It knows I'm looking," and fled into the shadows. Now, her once youthful curiosity had hardened into something sharper, understanding. What she'd uncovered wasn't just another chapter in the wand's bloody history. It was a revelation. Harry Potter hadn't just defeated Voldemort. He'd unraveled the very myth that had fueled the wand's power for centuries. By walking away, by refusing to become another link in its chain, he'd exposed the truth she'd spent a lifetime chasing. The Elder Wand was never cursed. The realization hit her like a gust of winter wind. All those murders, all those betrayals, they hadn't been the wand's doing. They were choices. Human, messy, greedy choices. The wand was just wood and magic. It was the stories people told about it, the desperation in their voices when they whispered its name, that gave it teeth. Now came the question that kept her awake at night. Should the world know? Her quill hovered over a fresh parchment, caught between duty and fear. Publishing her findings would demystify the wand, strip it of its lethal allure. But it might also stir old hungers, send a new generation digging through graveyards for a relic they'd now know could be claimed. She thought of Grindelwald's hollow eyes in his prison cell, of Gregorovich's ruined workshop. How many more would fall if the wand's truth became just another piece of history to conquer? But then how many would be saved if they understood it was never the wand that wielded the wizard, but the other way around? Outside her window, the first light of dawn touched the spines of books, lining her shelves, titles filled with tragedies that began with "Once there was a wand." She pulled a fresh sheet of parchment closer. The irony wasn't lost on her. After a lifetime of chasing the wand's story, she'd become part of it. The only question left was what kind of part she'd choose to be. The fire crackled low in the hearth as the historian sat back, her fingers stained with ink and ash. The manuscript before her, years of painstaking research, of tracking the Elder Wand's path through whispers and ruins, weighed heavier than any book had a right to. She'd chased the truth like a hunter stalks prey, only to realize too late that some prey should never be caught. Her quill hovered over the final page, trembling. To publish this would be to strip the wand of its mystique, yes, but it would also hand its legend a new kind of power, proof, validation, a roadmap for the next desperate soul who thought they could outsmart history. She'd seen what happened to those who sought the wand, even those who only sought to understand it. Ceridwen's fate had been warning enough. With a slow breath, she made her choice. The parchment curled at the edges as she held it to the candle's flame, watching ink-blackened words dissolve into smoke. Not every truth deserved to breathe. Some were better left buried, not out of fear, but out of mercy. The chest beneath her desk groaned open, its iron hinges protesting like old bones. Inside lay fragments, a chipped wand case from Gregorovich's workshop, a page from Dumbledore's notes, even a lock of Grindelwald's hair preserved in a vial. Pieces of the puzzle no one would ever reassemble. She placed her own research atop the relics, then closed the lid with a click that echoed like a tomb ceiling. History would remember the Elder Wand as a fairy tale, a cautionary whisper, and she would become what all good historians eventually do, a footnote forgotten. But in that forgetting lay the wand's final defeat, because legends don't die when they're erased. They die when no one cares enough to tell them anymore. The key turned in the lock, and for the first time in decades, the weight lifted from her shoulders. Let the scholars debate, let the fools dig. The wand's story ended here, in silence, by the hands of the one person who loved truth enough to let it go. The Elder Wand never truly sleeps. Even buried beneath white marble, its presence hums through the wizarding world like a half-remembered melody, a tune that stirs something restless in the hearts of those who catch its echo. You'll hear it in the way collectors trace their fingers over ancient texts, in the sharp intake of breath, when a duelist spots a flicker of golden light that might, just might, be the wand's legendary glow. It doesn't matter that Harry broke its cycle. The wand's whisper lingers because humanity's hunger for power outlasts even the strongest magic. Take the case of Ignatius Burke, the black market dealer who spent 30 years hunting down every artifact connected to the wand. He didn't want to wield it. He wasn't foolish enough for that. No, he wanted to own the myth. His vaults brimmed with shards of Gregorovich's workbench, scraps of Dumbledore's robes, even a vial of dust, claimed falsely to be from Grindelwald's cell. But here's the tragedy. The closer he got to the wand's orbit, the more it consumed him. He began refusing to sell the relics, hoarding them like a dragon guarding gold, convinced they'd whisper their secrets if he listened hard enough. They never did. He died surrounded by fragments of a story he'd mistaken for a prize, his fortune wasted on the empty promise of proximity to power. Then there are the dreamers. The young witches and wizards who hear the tale of Harry's triumph and twist it into something darker. If he could master it without wanting it, they reason, what could someone do who truly deserved it? They don't say this aloud, of course, not at first. It starts as idle curiosity, a research project, a family history dive, an innocent fascination with wand lore. But the wand's whisper is patient. It waits for the moment they are alone in a library past midnight, for the heartbeat when their fingers brush a certain passage in magic most evile, and suddenly the idea takes root. What if I could find it? Just to see, just to know, this is the wand's final trick, the one even Harry couldn't destroy. It doesn't need to be held to wield influence. Its power lies in the space between what if and why not, in the quiet conviction that this time would be different. History's greatest fools weren't those who sought the wand. They were the ones who believed they could resist its pull once they started looking. So the whisper endures. In dusty apothecaries where old men trade rumors for galleons. In classrooms where overeager students debate whether Dumbledore's tomb was ever truly its resting place. Even in the mirror, when someone exceptionally bright, exceptionally ambitious, catches their own reflection and wonders just for a second if they'd be the one to finally, truly master it. The wand's last lesson isn't about magic at all. It's about the stories we tell ourselves to justify our hunger. And as long as those stories exist, the Elder Wand's whisper will never fade. Not really. It just waits for the next person, arrogant enough to think they're the exception. The internet age should have killed the Elder Wand's legend for good. With every grimoire digitized, every dark artifact cataloged in some online archive, you'd think there'd be no mysteries left to chase. But that's the thing about forbidden knowledge, it doesn't disappear. It just learns new disguises. Take the forums. Deep in the unlit corners of wizarding message boards, threads pop up like mushrooms after rain. Elder Wand replica, authentic materials, Dumbledore's last spellwork, any eyewitness accounts. The posters are mostly young 16, 17. Their usernames studded with edgy symbols, their posts dripping with the arrogance of kids who think they've outsmarted history. They trade PDFs of Ceridwen's fragmented journals like trading cards, piecing together half-truths into a game they don't realize they're playing for keeps. And then there are the collectors, not the old money purists like Burke, but a new breed tech-savvy, impatient, armed with cryptocurrency, and a pathological need to own what others can't. Last year, a cursed auction in Vienna saw a single strand of Grindelwald's hair sell for 600,000 galleons. The buyer, a 23-year-old app developer from Seattle, who bragged on WizTalk about unlocking the wand's DNA. He vanished 3 weeks later, his flat emptied of everything but a shattered mirror and the faint smell of burning elder wood. But the real danger isn't the reckless or the greedy. It's the true believers, the quiet ones, like the Hogwarts 7th year who spent last winter break mapping every centimeter of the Forbidden Forest, convinced Dumbledore hid the wand there instead of his tomb. Or the curse breaker in Cairo, who quit her job to chase rumors of a sister wand buried with an unnamed pharaoh. They don't post about their hunts. They don't brag. They just disappear, and when their journals surface years later in second-hand shops, the pages are always torn at the edges, not by time, but by frantic fingers. The worst part, they're not entirely wrong. The wand is out there, not in some physical form Harry saw to that, but as something far more contagious, an idea. It slithers into the gaps between logic and obsession, whispering that this time will be different, that they could be the one to wield it safely. And with every new seeker, the cycle doesn't just restart, it evolves. A Ravenclaw in 2018 tried to algorithmically predict the wand's next appearance based on lunar cycles. A Durmstrang student last year brewed a potion meant to attract powerful artifacts and wound up melting through 3 floors of his dormitory. Each attempt is more absurd than the last, and yet the wand's myth survives, thrives even, because the internet didn't kill the legend. It gave it infinite places to hide. So the question isn't whether someone will rediscover the Elder Wand, it's whether we'll recognize the moment they do, or if we'll just chalk it up to another online creepypasta, right up until the bodies start piling up again. History doesn't repeat itself, but human nature, that's a different story. The firelight flickered across the deep lines of Harry Potter's face as he leaned forward, the weight of decades pressing into his voice. "I've held it, you know," he murmured, fingers tracing the edge of his own well-worn wand. "Not the real one, not after that night at Hogwarts, but I've felt its echo in every bad decision I ever made when I thought I knew better." The room seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't the bright-eyed hero of the Daily Prophet headlines. This was a man who'd outlived too many friends to still believe in fairy tale endings. He spoke of Gregorovich first, not the wand maker's downfall, but his early brilliance. How the man could craft a wand so finely tuned it felt like an extension of the soul. "That's what made it so tragic," Harry said, shaking his head. "He could have been remembered for his art. Instead, he's a footnote in the wand's bloody history." The lesson wasn't subtle. Talent doesn't protect you from ambition. Then came the story few had heard. The Bulgarian seer who'd prophesied Grindelwald's rise years before it happened. She saw the wand in his hand, saw the cities burning, Harry said quietly, and when she tried to warn the ministry, they locked her in St. Mungo's for disturbing the peace. His knuckles whitened around his teacup. That's the first rule of power, isn't it? The people who crave it most will always silence those who see the danger coming. But the sharpest warning came wrapped in silence. Harry's gaze drifted to the window, where storm clouds gathered like old ghosts. "After the war, I thought about keeping it, just for a while, just until things were safe." A humorless chuckle, as if safety was ever the point. The moment you start bargaining with power, you've already lost. He'd learned that not from Dumbledore's books, but from watching the man's portrait age in the headmaster's office. Another reminder that wisdom often arrives too late. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. "You'll hear people say the wand's curse was broken when I returned it," Harry said, suddenly fierce. "Don't believe them. Curses don't break, they just wait for the next person to forget they exist." He reached into his pocket and tossed a galleon onto the table, where it spun on its edge before settling. "Every generation has its Grindelwald, its Voldemort. The wand doesn't make them, it just shows them what they already are. And then, softer, I buried it to protect fools from themselves." But the thing about fools, they always bring shovels. The seekers came in threes, always threes, as if the number itself held some magic against the wand's curse. First, the curse breaker from Gringotts, her robes still singed from whatever Egyptian tomb she'd plundered last. Then the historian, his spectacles cracked from squinting at too many faded manuscripts. Last, the dueling champion, his knuckles scarred from battles he'd won, but couldn't remember why he'd fought. They'd follow different paths to the same realization. The Elder Wand wasn't a prize to be won. It was a test, and they'd all failed before they'd even begun. What changed wasn't some grand revelation. No dusty tome or dying mentor whispered the secret to them. It was the quiet moments, the curse breaker waking to find her hotel room ransacked, not by thieves, but by her own frantic hand. The historian realizing he'd missed his daughter's first broom flight because he'd been chasing a dead man's shadow. The champion noticing how his reflection in the trophy case looked less like a victor and more like a man waiting for the next knife in his back. The wand's true curse wasn't death. It was the slow erosion of everything that made you you, so they walked away, not in some dramatic renunciation, not with a vow to destroy the legend. Those gestures would have meant they still believed in its power. They simply stopped looking. The curse breaker took a job identifying counterfeit cauldrons. The historian wrote a best-selling book on medieval wizarding knitting patterns. The champion opened a tea shop in Hogsmeade and refused to so much as touch a dueling wand again. The wand's whisper didn't vanish overnight, but with every birthday celebrated, every quiet afternoon spent reading by the fire, its voice grew fainter, until one day they realized they couldn't remember the last time they'd heard it at all. This was the revolution Harry had unknowingly begun, not by breaking the wand's power, but by proving its irrelevance. For centuries, the wand's legacy had been written in blood and betrayal. Now it was written in small choices, a researcher closing a book, a traveler turning down a dark alley, a witch pausing before asking a question she knew would lead nowhere good. The seekers who walked away didn't just save themselves. They became quiet proof that the most powerful magic wasn't in wands or relics, but in the courage to say, "This story ends with me." And perhaps that's the most astonishing twist of all. The Elder Wand's final defeat wasn't marked by some epic battle or earth-shattering revelation. It was the sound of 100 ordinary lives being lived well, of laughter in a tea shop, of a child's delighted gasp as her father finally came home on time, of the comfortable silence between friends who'd once been rivals. The wand's cycle didn't shatter. It faded, like an old man's voice in a crowded room, still talking long after everyone had stopped listening. The Elder Wand's story doesn't conclude with a triumphant victor or a dramatic final duel. It ends in something far quieter and far more revolutionary, a choice, not the kind etched in lightning, struck towers or shouted across battlefields, but the kind made in stillness, in the space between heartbeats. Harry's decision to return the wand to Dumbledore's tomb wasn't just an act of defiance against its bloody legacy. It was proof that the most powerful magic in existence wasn't a spell or a relic, but the will to say, "No more." Think about it. For centuries, the wand's path had been a straight line, master to master, betrayal to betrayal, each wielder convinced they'd be the one to break the cycle. But cycles don't break through force. They break when someone steps off the path entirely. That's the real lesson hidden in the wand's history. Power isn't something you take. It's something you refuse. And yet here's the paradox. The wand's dark legacy isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a mirror. Every time someone whispers its name in longing, every time a new seeker digs through old graves or deciphers coded journals, they're not chasing the wand. They're chasing the idea of themselves as the exception, the one who could wield ultimate power without being corrupted by it. But that's the wand's oldest trick. It doesn't corrupt, it reveals. Grindelwald didn't become a monster because of the wand. The wand simply showed the world what he'd always been. So where does that leave us? With a story, yes, but more than that. With a question, not what would you do with the Elder Wand, but who would you become trying to get it? Because the wand's true power was never in its magic. It was in the way it made people betray themselves long before they ever held it. That's why Harry's choice matters. Not because he was the chosen one, or the boy who lived, but because he was the first to look at the wand's promise and see the lie at its core. Power isn't measured by what you can take. It's measured by what you can walk away from. And in walking away, Harry did what no spell could ever accomplish. He turned the wand's curse into a choice. The Elder Wand rests now where it belongs, not in the hands of a master, but in the quiet of a grave. Its story isn't over. Stories like this never are. But it's no longer a story about invincibility. It's a story about the price of believing in it, and that's a tale worth remembering.